I could exchange this word for status. The second base is always going to be interested in its status. And of course, this status ultimately is a material status. You know, I have a hut. Here's my hut. You know, this is what I have. This is what I have. So what that second base does is that not only does it create this environment, an inner world. Remember, with the first base, we only have an outer world. We only have activity. We only have driving outward. The moment we come here to the second base, we have the need to create an inner world, a world where we can be sheltered in that sense. That's the place where we remember. Character gives you your role. You see, what we collect defines our value to the rest of society. Now today, most of us in the West, we live in a world where if you have collected enough information intellectually, that's as valuable as what once was a piece of property somewhere with a mule and a couple of kids helping you grow your crops. But the fact is that this is about status. Now, isn't it interesting to see how the yang works? You know, the yin says, you're all my children. The yang says, screw that. That's not true. That's not true. You know, the first base is interested in its place in the hierarchy. Where am I? And the second base says, yeah, okay, that's fine, I'm over here, but what are my perks? You know, what do I have? What status do I get out of being in this position in the hierarchy? And what accrues to me for that status? Why do you think we pay some people more money for things than, other? I mean, it's all built into us. And this whole question of status is all built into us. What we possess is very, very important to us as a species. If you're a female bird and you don't have a branch where you can reliably and securely stand on and call for a mate, you're dead meat. I mean, nothing's ever going to work in your life. And genetically, you're a failure because you're not going to be able to successfully reproduce. Status is very important, and one of the things that animals will always do is that they love to brag about their territory. I've had dogs all my life. They'll piss on anything. This is mine. This is my territory. So this is the second base, and you can see that second base operating in any dog. Cats too. Cats love to spray. They all love to mark the ground. They all love to tell you, here's my status. I know where I am and it's mine. That's the whole thing. And it is this possessiveness that is here. And when I speak of possessiveness, by the way, I am not talking about ego. I'm talking about the mind trip. I mean, this is the great mind trip place. This is the place that says, okay, this is where I am in the hierarchy, but what am I getting for that? I'm not getting enough. It's all mind trip. But again, it's part of us being competitive. It's part of the impact of the yang. It's part of the way in which the yang pushes us. I remember it's the best part of mind for me. I love memory. I'm astonished by the way in which the human mind can store information. It is extraordinary. And how much information it can store. And how quick you can access that information. That memory is an extraordinary thing. And having spent so much of my life dealing with other kinds of life forms, dealing with animals, dealing with birds, dealing with other creatures, it's so obvious how different we are in that way. How different our experience of the mental plane is. That's obvious when you look at the matrices, and they have stood up. So you look at the matrices of the mammal or the matrices of whatever, a bird, fish, reptile, and you can see the limitation. No solar plex center, no ego center, no ajna center, no head center. You know, those four centers represent for us what is truly our human process, not just the life-living process. Those other centers are all about the life-living process. When we get out to the outside of that, we have something different. And the difference is our capacity not only to be able to remember, but to be able to remember in depth and to be able to use it and cross-reference it. In other words, to be able to expand the very memory itself into all kinds of tools, educational tools, you know, the ability to be able to track information and make sure that other people get access to that information and to house that. If it wasn't for the second base, you would never have a university. It wouldn't exist. You wouldn't have schools. You know, you would have no generalized education. None of those things would exist. And if you remember, those of you who have, you know, I'm in my 50s. When I started going to school, when I was in public school, one of the most important things that was done with you every day was that you had memory work. And most of education was memory. You know, if you go back and look at the education of Marcus Aurelius, who was a Roman emperor thousands of years ago, you'll see that his job as a student was only to memorize things. You know, memory was everything. Memory is at the core of education. One of the great disasters in the North American educational system was the moment they moved away from memory and from doing memory work with children. Because the establishment of memory and a healthy memory system, your memory is there to be worked with. If you do not work with your memory, you know, you are limited as an intelligence because you have less material to access and to work with. It's very important for us to understand that memory is something that we have to treat with respect. A very simple thing. I spent many years teaching people memory techniques, and something that anybody can use, and it's no labor. Whenever you read something, hear something, see something that interests you, tell somebody. That's all. It's the most important memory trick of all. Because by the time you process that, you know, it seems like a simple thing, but the fact of the matter is that the number of things that have to take place in your whole neural system to get that thing that had gone in, to get it to go back out, that concretizes it. You won't forget it after that. You know, and this is something to understand about what the second base brings for us. You see, we all experience that now with computers. You know, when I got my first computer, you know, I had a memory, you know, it was worse than a parakeet. You know, now I got a memory that no parakeet could even imagine. And of course, the more memory I have, the more capacity I have, the more potential I have, the more things that I can do and work with. That's why memory is so important. And it's not about saying, okay, I'm going to sit down and memorize all this stuff. You know, it's just about understanding that that's what this second base brings into our lives. It brings into our lives the importance of holding on to the past. The past. Holding on to the past. Holding on to everything as you're moving by, grabbing it, holding on to it, concretizing it as memory. And it's out of that I remember that you can tell somebody who you are. Think about all these Hollywood dramatizations of amnesia. The good ones, anyway. Because there's a lot of terrible ones. And you know, you get the good one and you realize the horror of that. Because you see, if you truly lose your memory, boy, you got nothing to stand on. You don't know who the hell you are. You have no idea. You're alive and bubbling, but you have no past, no nothing. Every day starts all over again. That may sound enlightened, you know, but that's okay if you're a dog, and even a dog wouldn't necessarily appreciate it at that level. That's true, Mike. I just heard a terrible story today about one of my dogs that went out and killed 11 turkeys the other day. And I thought, good for her. I never liked those neighbors, you know. Go for it, Alma. So, remembering. To take things in and to remember them. And again, the importance of understanding why we were given a throat. You know, we were given a throat and we were given a mind so that we could communicate to each other. There is nothing more important at the superficial level, at the mundane level in the world than our ability to communicate with each other. And of course, the whole business of your status is determined by what your memory is. And if you don't think so, watch what happens to you from now on. As you just watch the program of you being with others, meeting with others, talking with others. See, the status is always there. The questions of place in the hierarchy are always there. If you're a baby and if you could have your adult consciousness and be in a baby's body, you know, you would begin to realize how they can differentiate entirely about what kind of people are in their parents' life just by the tone of voice they use, the inflection that's in the tone, the quality that's there. They know whether somebody is being subservient, aggressive, you name it, they pick up all the nuances because everything is there. This remembrance business is very, very important for us. It's out of this that we find what we can identify with. And this is the great base of identification. You know, all the Atman gurus in the world are never going to get rid of identification. From the lowest level, and I don't mean that hierarchically, from the base level, you know, identification is there right up to the 16th gate in the, you know, in the body graph and operating through the logical process. Identification is there. It's essential for us to identify with ourselves and our position in life. I mean, it's essential. We're all doing it all the time. And we're all doing it, remember, all of this is going on at a level that you do not have ready access to. It's not like you're tuned into this. You're not. It's just the way it works. After all, you don't know why it is that you want a house around you. I mean, it's just what everybody's been doing for a very long time. You know, all of these things are just part of the dimensional reality as it evolves. You know, often when I look at it that way, I often see the second base in the way in which Picasso first imagined what became Cubism. You know, you see all these boxes and all these aura boxes and all these environments and all these enclosed environments next to enclosed environments next to enclosed environments. You know, all of this just moving like that. You know, that's literally what it is. And of course, again, that's part of our development because that's the brain. Do you know that you do not store a single word in your brain? Not one word. Think about that. Not one word. Only sounds. Only sound formulas. You know, so if you want to say rock, you know, there's a r out there somewhere, and there's a oh somewhere, and there's a cock out there somewhere. And then you get the whole thing out. But it's all in different places in the brain, and it comes together as an instantaneous formula. It's all in little compartments. And if there isn't a way to remember how to remember, you know, you're lost. You just lost. You see, we have all these illusions about the way in which these things work. It's all compartmentalized. It is a cubist brain with all these little boxes inside holding all this little information. What was that folk singer in the 40s and the 50s? Little boxes, all made out of ticky-tacky. You know, there's all these little boxes. They're all stuffed with stuff. You know, they're all in there. You know, the fact of the matter is that one of the most interesting things about memory is that we store everything. Every breath, everything that's coming in, all the things you know that are coming in, all the things you don't know that are coming in, all of that is stored. Most of those boxes we never get to, but it doesn't mean they're not used. You know, they're in a chain and in a string, and they have a way of weaving together. We store all of this incredible information. All of that is here. Remember, all the first base does is make you alive. You're alive. You know, it's the wriggling maggot. You know, you're alive. Was that too harsh? Oh, it's a heavy image, eh? But it's true. Have you ever seen them when they come, whoo, it's life, they're buzzing. It's here when you get to the second base that you get to that next stage in the evolution, which is that, okay, great for the buzz, but we have things that we have to work out. We have things that we need to remember. We need to be able to grow in that way. We need to pull things towards us. We need to be accumulative. This is the yin teaching the yang about resources. Yes, it's very nice that you like to travel in your car, dear, but who's going to pay for the gas? The yang just wants to drive. The yin says, wait a minute, resources. The most extraordinary resource we have is mind. It's mind. There was this fabulous commercial on TV. I don't know when that was, in the 80s. I think there was this Indian, in full Indian regala or whatever, and he's got this tear coming down his cheek, and it was something like a wasted mind is a terrible thing, or whatever the pitch was. But it's really the truth. I mean, mind is the great resource. We actually live in a day and age in which, your mental worth is what matters today in most cases. And as we move further and further into this technological century, we're going to see that, the value of individual mind is something that's going to continue to grow. In other words, we have left behind the brawn. We've left behind all of this. You've got to trudge in the factory for the rest of your life, and your children have to go down in the mine and all of that stuff. We have new capital. We have the development of intellectual currency, intellectual capital. All of this leads us to the question here of what? Not where am I? What am I? And of course, that what am I brings many things. It brings, again, the continuation of separation, but it also brings unification. Again, seeing that uniqueness doesn't mean that we're truly different. We have vast commonalities in various areas. So one of the things here about the what is, who do you allow, or who do you pull to yourself? Who do you allow to gravitate towards you because you need them to fulfill a larger integrative purpose? The whole beginnings of what will be our social mechanism, if you will, really begins here. Because, of course, this is ultimately about our spirit. You see, I have a hard time with quote-unquote spiritual people. I don't really see the sense of only being satisfied in the light. Because it's not the way of the world. The way of the world is to be in matter. It's to be in the form. And the way of the world is status. It is about your place in the hierarchy. And that only when you accept where you are and who you are, only then are you going to have the Spirit. And that the Holy Spirit is in that. It's not about intellectually what you think about those concepts, because you can't escape them anyway. It isn't about that. And it certainly isn't about how you deal with that at the surface of your design as a rave. Because by the time you get up there, it's long away. But you see, the real spirit here is that you must be identified with your role in this life. You must be identified with your character in this life. You must be identified with what you have collected in this life. It's so important. It makes it a very, very difficult world to live in for at least half the planet. The yang is cruel in the way in which it operates. It just is. It is, after all, a penetrating force, and it doesn't know particularly what the hell's going on. It just needs to go where it has to go. And that the whole development of mind and the whole development is all rooted in status, because that's the only way in which the hierarchy can operate properly, so that we don't waste the resources of the gene pool. I mean, Obviously, we didn't need any more than one person to get the experience with the voice. I mean, we didn't. And it works in a hierarchy. You're first generation to this knowledge, and many of you for a long time and deeply. And there will be second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth generation that'll operate in all of that, but it's just the natural way in which things work. You know, if you took 1 million people and you gave them my regimen to what led up to my experience, they'd all be dead anyway. Just a waste of resources and good drugs, by the way. Just wasted on a lot of dead meat. And you see, the moment that somebody says, oh, gee, I wish I could do that, you know. And of course, we're always doing that at some level or another in our lives. You know, that's the unaware reality. Ignorance is like that. People are always running around saying, well, you know, I would like to be up there. You know, I need to have this. You know, I need to learn this. That's one of the biggest things now, eh? What should I learn? You know, what should I learn? I mean, that's as difficult a question today as any question has ever been for anybody, because there's so much. You know, what do I learn? So the second base brings us something entirely different. What that second base begins is it says, look, we're all in competition, so let's see how we work all this out. Okay? And let's see who everybody is in this competition. And let's see what everybody's role is in this competition, so that we can have a better understanding of what this is all about. And out of that, we get the identification. But again, remember, if you look at mind over here, the second one down, and you look at the bottom, the character, separation, nature, integration, it goes down to spirit. And it is all about finding the spirit. And if you look at the macrocosmic side, it's all about love as light. You see, philosophically, we have ways in which we have given things their names, their qualities, whatever, that lead to certain kinds of prejudices in the way in which we look at any of these things. You know, I want you to really be clear about how important it is for us to have these positions. And yet there is a way for all of us to accrue this naturally. I mean, that's the point. I mean, it really is the point. The 70% of the population that's either a generator or a manifesting generator, that the moment they're operating out of a response, in the moment they do that, they are going to accrue to themselves exactly what is correct for them. Not the memory they don't need, not the status they don't need. You know, that's the whole thing. There's so many people who think that the next level, whatever that may be, and that's part of life, that there's always levels. You know, the assumption that the next level is going to bring something, for many people, they would have been much happier staying back where they were and forgetting about what that next level really brought them, because in fact, they were not ready for that. And it goes on all the time. You know, there's all kinds of people who think they deserve. I love that. You know, they deserve to be here or there or whatever the case may be. You know, and everybody better notice that, blah, blah, blah. If you're living out your own nature, the respect that is due you comes to you. I mean, that's what it's about. You know, it isn't about any inflated stature. I don't need to sit in a fucking throne. I don't have to be elevated above people. I don't have to blow up my whatever it is. Blows up by itself. I don't have to do anything about all that. You know, the moment that you can just live out your nature, you can be in your place within the structure, and none of that has to do with vanity. Doesn't have to do. Remember, we don't get to the ego until much later, until we get to the fourth base. We're not talking about ego here. You know, we're talking about the place, and we're talking about what is our place in all of that. What are we in all of that? It's this ongoing yang process of comparing, and at the same time, through the comparing, trying to find a way to integrate. Okay, I'm here in that position. All right. I accept. I'm integrated. Hey, everybody leave me alone. You're up there. Good. Nice. Have a good time. You down there? Good. The joke is, of course, that there is no up and down in all of that. There's just the movement. You know, it's all relative. However, it's necessary for us. I always want you to grasp the necessity of things that we often find uncomfortable, that we often don't like philosophically or in the social context. And for us to see that these things are basic instruments of the way in which life works, that the yang has to do its job, that the yang needs to be alone, needs to penetrate, needs to set all that up. And when it first meets the yin, it has to say, okay, I'll build you a house. I mean, it's such an old archetype, eh? You know, there's the yang running around wild, bangs into some lovely yin. You know, and the first thing it has to do is build a house. You know, that's what you get when you come to the second facet. That's what the second facet is. It says, okay. Look, we'll create an inner world in here. And you can run around inside my inner world and penetrate me in here, okay? So that we don't do that on the fly. I always used to love that in mating season, deer mating season in Bavaria. There's no fencing. You know, there's just signs that say, look out for deer. And of course, if you've ever seen deer mate, it's really a delight because it's one of the fastest things on earth, eh? The buck is roaring after the doe and they're flying around and they go leaping across the highway and, you know, your brakes are slamming on and, yeah. And, you know, that's the movie because at the moment that the race is over, the building begins. I mean, that's in the design of life. So we start building things, and what we end up with is that the second base builds our cities. You know, turns us towards the civilization and the evolution that we have. You know, puts us in a place where we develop structures for purposes. You know, buildings that are designed for manufacturing. I mean, you might think of that as being an obvious, but it wasn't 500 years ago. In other words, you know, all of these, you know, applications of the combination of creating inner worlds so that we can see the status, all of that stuff. I mean, at the core of religion is this second base. Remember, love is light, blah, 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 spirit. These are the temple builders. I mean, these are the temple builders. You know, that's their response in all of that. Their response in all of that is, okay, I identify with this God, you know, and I identify with this God and I am going to build an idol. I'm going to build a statue. I'm going to build a temple. Eventually you'll build whatever your churches, synagogues, mosques, you name it. It's just what we do. It's not like you can get rid of it. You know, I mean, I'd like to get rid of all the ugly temples. I don't want to get rid of beautiful ones because they're beautiful. And I got nothing against beauty. But I mean, ugly temples, you know, let's get rid of them. Nonetheless, that's not going to happen. We have all these second base people and I can't get rid of these creatures. And we're going to end up continuing to have people who keep on building temples until we lose our fingers. And that will be great. Because then we won't be able to build any more temples, and I think that will be delightful. However, that's a complete change of design and consciousness, so we can deal with that at a later date. As far as this is concerned, we're going to keep on building all these damn monuments. I turned on the TV yesterday, and there's this Oklahoma City monument, you know. There's always a damn monument somewhere building some kind of temple to something. This is the second base. And what do they build these monuments for? So we will remember. That's what this is all about. You build the monument so we remember. So you got all these old Assyrian warlords with their stelae, you know, these huge phallic stones in the desert saying, look, I whipped the ass out of the tribe, you know? So you'll remember. And we concretize it into the form so you'll remember. You know, the pyramids, eh? This was my house. You know, this is my death ship. You're good. You know, on the backs of all those poor souls that built the damn thing. Generators, of course. All of them generators. You know, all of them dragging the stones saying, you know, I don't like this work. I'd really like to quit, you know, but they'll kill me. Oh, wait a minute. There's Moses. Let's go. Yeah. Yes, it is. I have to finish this, though. We're stuck with being identified with a god or a goddess. This is what the second base does. It sticks us with that. We're not going to escape that. We're never going to escape it. It's so deep inside of us that there is nothing we're going to do. And we all have temples. And whether those temples are temples that we're building on the outside, or they're temples that we build in our houses. I've got my own little temples. Everybody, it is there inside of us. It's always going to be there. And it says something very important. Be careful about turning your back on the gods and goddesses, because they're still alive and doing well. They're still active. They are still forces in the world. You know that when I speak in that way, I speak the same way as in terms of the planets, in talking about them or anthropomorphizing them as those kinds of forces. The crystal bundles that bring us information, the various stellar systems that bring us information, all of that has been translated through our experience as gods, goddesses, all of these various forces. They're alive and well and need to be honored. And if you don't honor them, well, you get to see what happens. It's built into us to identify. We need to identify with that force. We need to identify with the creative force. And there's a creative mystery here. And it's the creative mystery that suddenly comes into existence, and only into existence, when the yang and the yin come together. It wasn't possible in the yang alone, but here when the yang and the yin come together, taste, after all, here we are able to see that there is a great mystery at work. Our identification with the field of light, our building of all of these temples, all of that, they're with us till the end of being human. They're not going to go away. And the second base isn't going to be annihilated and disappear. It means that the temples are going to be taken inside. Inside. Each of us, each of you, each of whatever it is, as a temple in and of itself. A very different kind of way in which that will operate. But for us, this is all still part of what we're not very far away from, is the basic evolutionary program as it's finally beginning to show itself in this age. And that this proliferation of symbols and this proliferation of all of that stuff that we connect to our spirituality, all of that is part of the second base process, so we will remember. Susan came in wearing something, and Randy noticed that it was the goddess Mat. They're still around. There are gods and goddesses in the room. The forces are still there. We still have the concretization of those forces. And that's how we remember them. Why do you think that monotheistic religions were so hot about getting rid of idols? They didn't want us to remember anymore. And they were terrified of those idols. So what they really tried to do is just mar them, knock off their heads or stuff like that. Because that's where we store it. So it's one of those things to see that the great joke is that faith is some kind of, whatever, this loving of the Godhead, or this belief in the Godhead, or all of that stuff. But all of those monotheistic religions, they walk around with the crosses around their necks, or the Star of David around their necks, or, they're all carrying some kind of concretized, idolistic, image that's been impressed. And this is the way things work. If you're going to study the black arts, you start here. You start here. You see, because the moment that you concretize anything, you give it a life. You give it a life. You give it a history. Those things are forces. And it all begins with what this is all about. You have a car in the modern language. Your automobile. It is a status symbol. It's part of this same process. It's what you've got wrapped around you, what you've been able to pull around you. It's the status of your process, blah, 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 all of that stuff. And all of this is a necessary ingredient for us to find the Spirit, because we can't find the Spirit unless we have all that concrete material stuff. We have to be able to afford to build the temples. There was times in Europe in which there were societies that were barely surviving, and there were tons and tons of gold being used for the local church. And as decoration, blah, blah, blah. So that once a week, the tribe could come into that church and come into that glow. If you've ever seen, these churches, it blows your mind. They're on fire with light. I know a small church in southern Bavaria that is covered with gold. I mean, it's covered with gold. And you step into that place through the light, through the stained glass windows, and all of that gold is leaping, and there is golden light that infuses everything in that space. Imagine what it's like for a 17th century peasant who lived in a bloody dirt floor hut, who had given 1 week of his life every month to help work on that damn thing. He would come in there on Sunday and he'd sit in the glow of God, all concretized, so he could remember, so he could identify with it. It's our way. There are places in the world today in which you have societies that are deeply poor, and they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars in building New Age temples. It's a way in which we express our status as a whole. So one of the things to see is that the movement of this second base in its evolution is to finally come to a point in which there is a single identification. A single identification. Because eventually you can only go so far. In other words, the question of what? I am a man alone. And then you can go from there. And you keep on going out, and you can end up saying, I'm a citizen of this country, and I'm a citizen of this continent, and you eventually get to planet. You eventually get to trying to know what the whole is, and in that lies the possibility of evolving a single mental recognition of life. In other words, the completion of our education. And it is the evolution of the second base to bring us to that point where we can complete our education evolution, that we can get to the point that we can identify with the whole thing. I'm a mystic. I truly can say and know that it's true that this is my body. And I am fully identified with that body as mine. And I mean the whole thing. And that's the ultimate recognition for all of us to come to. That it is our body, and that to be identified with that totality, not as a construct, but simply as a fact of your own existence, a recognition as a byproduct of your own existence, that is so, and it is true. We are all programming agents in the whole. We are all fundamental aspects of the whole, in or out of incarnation, forever, from the beginning. That's just the way it is. So the goal that the second base brings in the terms of how that dimension operates for us is that this is the education dimension, and this is where we finally have to come to grips with everything so that we can finally identify completely, identify with what the whole is, and in that sense, fulfill our need for spirit. Our spirit is never going to be correct if what you think is your God and what I think is my God are enemies. All of that's nonsense. But that is part of the evolutionary process. We have to be separate before we can recognize the oneness. That is, after all, a mental trip. We got to go through that whole mind thing to finally get to the point that we understand all of this stuff, to finally be able to say, oh, gee, your God and my God, they actually have the same ancestor. Or the same God with different names, or, whatever the case may be. In other words, that's the final place that we go to. That's where our final status is. And I want you to understand this as a final comment before our break. This whole biblical expression of seeing ourselves in God's image. That's us. We're here to identify with God. We're here to identify with the creative forces. We're here to become gods ourselves in that sense. Because we're here to be one with the totality, and the totality is nothing but a matrix of gods. This is a very beautiful thing. This whole process that comes out of what at the mundane level isn't so pretty, after all. It just isn't. We needed to get to this point of this vast expansion of our population and all the aura boxes of the world and the byproduct of all of that and all of those things that come with it and all of the pain and suffering of the many that cannot gain access to the success of our species. That also to see that there's a real glory in this. The glory is that there is a way for us to be educated to going beyond godliness. There's a way for us to be educated to the point that we transcend all of that. In other words, that we truly know what we are within the whole. Not where, but what we are and what our contribution is to the whole, so we can be identified with that process. I love just the basics of what the yin is. I'm a great admirer of the yin. I'm a great servant of the yin. And I like its snappiness. It brings you to attention. It says, hey, look, this running around is terrific. It's very impressive to see you running up and down and running up and down. And it's real impressive that you can build those huts and you can build those statues and you can build those temples. I'm only interested in one thing. I'm interested in staying alive. Staying alive is what it's all about. Oh, yes, the yang can say life, 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 and wriggle and wriggle and wriggle. But it's the yin that says, excuse me. After the wriggling comes feeding time, that you have to survive. That you have to be able to deal with the fact that you are in a body. Being is matter, matter is. This is the yin-yin. This is the yin-yin. This is the polarity to the first base. You'll notice that the way in which these are being drawn out for you, pay attention to that configuration because it's slightly different than you would expect normally. In other words, you've had the yang-yang first, then you have the yang-yin. Now you have the yin-yin, and we'll finish with the yin-yang. Now, what the yin-yin brings us is that the yin-yin brings us something very basic. Survival operates two ways. Two ways. One way of survival is that you have to be able to satisfy the body. And in satisfying the body, that means that you need to have a proper combination of both solid and liquid going into you. And the other part of that is the survival of the species that is being itself surviving. And if you look at that, you could really take away being and you could substitute sex, body and sex. You could put those two in that sense together. Remember that from the base level, sex has absolutely nothing to do with the rave level. In other words, this is pure biological imperative. This is the genetic imperative that says we need to multiply. Sex is survival. It is survival for the species. And you know very well that you're not going to be able to do well if you cannot reproduce, because sooner or later you're going to die out. And of course, this is deeply opposite what is built into us dimensionally, that we are here to survive. Over and over and over again in my lifetime, I have been astonished at human tenacity for survival. It boggles the mind. what human beings will put up with, the tortures they'll put up with, the handicaps they'll put up with, the discomforts they'll put up with, the tenacity within us to stay alive. This is the mother's gift, after all. You see, it's not enough to be alive. You want to stay alive. That's the whole thing. It's what the yin brings. It says, hey, excuse me, survival. Survival's number one. And for survival number one, we have to do a number of things. The first thing that we have to do is that we have to realize something very basic. You're not going to be able to eat well if you hunt alone. It's such a basic thing. Not only that, you're not going to be able to trust who's hunting to feed you unless you have some kind of way of making sure of that. That's sex. See, we're designed to come together. We're designed to reproduce. The yin is designed to nurture. The yang, and I'm speaking of pure yin, pure yang, not what's in between. The yang is there to go out and penetrate. But you see, we cannot do that alone. We can't do that alone, and only the mother can do that because the mother is never truly alone. Because the mother is always there to carry and reproduce and create life. They're a medium for life. The yin is a medium for life. This is not about sex as pleasure. This is not about sex as activity. This is not about sex as philosophy or technique. This is none of those things. This is basic requirement. This is being alive 101. And this moment that you have the yin there, you must have the reproductive potential. You know, I enjoy these journeys that we take together because I get a lot of jokes as I move along the way. And it's wonderful to see that the first base says, where, and the second base says, what? But then you bring in the yin, and she says, okay, when? It's wonderful. There's the yang saying, oh, I'm going to build you this wonderful. And she says, when? How long do I have to survive until I can finally see that? Oh, it's a delight. Hillel was a Judaic scholar who lived at the same time as Christ. And he said, if you are not for yourself, who will be? And if you were only for yourself, what are you? And if not now, when? It's a great piece of business. And it's something for us to understand about what the mother really brings. Okay, when? When are you going to wake up? When are you going to get it right? When are you going to learn how to survive? When are you going to learn the things that you really need to learn and not all that stuff out there? When are you going to learn to be a decent human being? When are you going to learn to be yourself? When are you going to learn to serve? All of that comes out of the mother. But the mother teaches us something even deeper than that. The mother knows that fate, in the broadest sense of that word, underlines everything, that the mother is helpless, like all of us. And it is helpless in the context of what you see here, the quality here. This is not about character, this is biology. It's not about what you think your status is. This is biological. This is about the physical being. This is about sustaining the physical being. And to sustain the physical being, there's something that's absolutely essential that only the mother brings. Touch. Oh, how sensuous the yin-yin is. Because everything for them operates through touch. And touch is not something that works at a distance. It's not. You got to get close. You have to come together. Now look, you come together. This is one of the things that's so interesting about the yin-yin is that the yin-yin demands that survival and the problems of survival are dealt with. They don't necessarily deal with it themselves. They don't necessarily. They find others to collaborate with. And that collaboration is rooted in sex. I don't want to upset the males here. But I will anyway. We're pretenders to any throne in all of this business between the sexes. Always have been. Regardless of what the social patina is or what the game of the civilization is. Because in the end, it's in the hands of the mother. It's in the hands of the yin. And it's up to the yin whether we can embrace or not. Remember that the best that the yang yin can do, the best that the second base can do, is that it can build its hut in an area where others build their huts that are not really uncomfortable for them. But that's not really collaboration. That's just the inability to escape the fact that we need to be together. But the second base is all busy building their separate shelter. It is the mother. It is the yin-yin that says, yes, 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 very nice. However, come out of there now. You come out of those inside worlds that you think are so important for you, and you come out into this outside world and you help us survive. Because if you don't help us survive, your inside world is going to dissolve and fall apart. That your mental world, remember that that's just a metaphor. The second base brings this enclosure, your private world, but it's also your mental plane. And the mother brings you back to your body. She says, all that's very nice, dear. I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. Would you have your dinner now? Sustenance, baby. Put some food in there. Because that's what the third base is about. And this is as objective as we get. The yin-yin is the ultimate objective force. It is literally out of the yin-yin that we come to what I bring you, which is this knowledge. In other words, it is here that we get to the point that we are able to clearly see the I am. The I am without the conditioning of the outside world. Just purely the I am vibrating within this biological matrix, and this biological matrix in a geometry, in the macrocosmic, to be able to see that this touch and sex and survival, that how deeply they're linked to each other, but they're linked to each other as objectivity, as geometry, as trajectory. See, the wisdom of the mother is not to resist. You ever go through birthing, either as a woman or as a partner, and you know right away that the good midwife who's going to take you through that process is going to say, now look, you cannot resist this. You cannot try to hold this back. You cannot fight this. You've got to let go in that sense. You have to let all of that happen. And one of the things that's deep within the female psyche, the yin-yin psyche, out of menstruation, out of childbirth, is all of these things that you're helpless to deal with. Males don't get that. Yang doesn't deal with that. And it changes the consciousness. Deeper into the helplessness of the biology, ruled by the hormones, ruled by all of that. And of course, it's true. It's true. And when you get down to this level where you're looking at the genetics, you know what you're seeing is, yes, it's true. We are the byproduct of our genes. We are. It doesn't mean, by the way, that the genes are everything, because that's something that people get caught up in and don't realize. You know, one of the things that design obviously teaches you is that you have your own unique genetic matrix. That's obvious. But at the same time, you're designed to be nurtured, what we call the conditioning that takes place when we interact through those gates or centers or channels or whatever that get defined. And that nurturing obviously is a deep part of our lives, because we are not separate from the other. That our psychic health, that our physical well-being is going to be integrated in our relationship with the other and the other in our aura. So it's important to see that the I am here is essential, because without that clear recognition of who you are, you're not going to be able to clearly see what is out there around you. The other thing is, you're not going to be surrendered. This is the one place where geometry and trajectory, what we talk about when we talk about profile, this is the one place where all of that is the theme. That it is all a movement. That it happens because it's a movement. And that's something that the yin is deeply aware of. That they have no control. They don't. None whatsoever. But out of that, they can know their form, because the form is everything. To find out what food is right to put into the body, how to get the food that you need into the body, how to develop ultimately the techniques for that. This search for survival, and yet at the same time never being allowed to escape the sexuality that is caught up in all of this. Everywhere you look, every instant, every moment, sex is happening. I mean, I'd like you to think about that. Everywhere, all the time, every instant. You know, bees do it, birds do, ba, 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 ba. It's going on all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. It never stops. You know, there's a statistic that says that a man has an erection for a minimum of 2 hours a day. Men are not allowed to blush at that. You know, it's built into the mechanism. It's built into the sexuality of the world. It is built into us being animals. It's there. Remember, again, we are still not at a base that is human. This is life. Life is sex. Life is survival. It's everywhere out there. There is nothing you can do. I had a delightful experience in Los Angeles. Eleanor and Marvin have a pool. And a duck has taken over and commanded that pool, who I have named Wilson. He's a very interesting duck. And Wilson lives in the pool, and Wilson has a mate. Now, Wilson found this pool. This is a Hollywood duck, eh? You know, it found this pool. It found a pool that's never used. It's not really chlorinated. It's kind of like normal. And it has human fools that are supplying it with duck food, if you can imagine. So it's got real duck food. Every afternoon, I watched. I loved this. You know what to do. Every afternoon, the duck, Bessie is her name, she would fly in from sitting on the eggs, right? And she'd come over and he'd do his little preening, and then he'd show her the way to the duck food. And she'd go over there and she'd eat and she'd eat and she'd eat, and he'd stand back very quietly, very patiently, going back and forth, watching her go through this whole movie. And when she was finally finished eating and she went back into the pool, he would immediately jump on her and make love to her. Nearly drowning the poor thing, dragging her down after dinner, drag her down under the water, make love to her, come up to the surface, go bada, bada, bada. You know, she flies off. He goes over to the food and stands by it like a sentinel. You know, it's what it's all about. And you know, she knows that he's a Hollywood duck. He did really good for her. I mean, she gets first-class food. It's an ancient bargain. It's an old piece of business, and it's in every form of life, and it's going on all the time. And don't drink their water out of the pool. Oh, I could get terribly rude. It leads us. Oh, God. It leads us to I am. I'm the duck that's got the duck food. It leads us to the I am. This is where we are. You see, the yang is separate, but it's mental. See, the yin knows something else about separateness, that separateness is housed. It's housed in these vehicles. It's housed in these bodies. The mother is always ready to honor the body first. After all, it's the yang that insists that there is something worth building a temple to. The yin already knows it's the body, and the female has always known that it's their body, after all. I mean, it is clear that the female body is the temple of life. It is clear. And it's always been that way. I mean, most temples have been nothing but yonis forever. Their entranceways were just, cosmic vaginas, and that's what it was all about. Because that is the temple of life, and so they're not deeply impressed with all that yang, ba. Yes, okay, you build it out of stone, Harry. Real life comes out of me. It's one of the basic conflicts in the psyche between the male and the female. And it is the source of yin power. It is its source. It is the life font. And it knows better than anyone else what the resources must be in order for those lives that it can carry to survive. Because survival means everything. If you're designed, remember, males cannot grasp this. If you're designed to carry life, that means inside of you, you have to have some kind of assurance, some way of imagining that you're going to be able to bring sustenance to that life. The great horror photograph is the starving mother, with the empty breasts and the dying child nursing at that. There's nothing more horrifying in the human psyche than such an image. They have to know within themselves. It's an essential ingredient. And what that means is that by knowing within themselves what's necessary for the survival, that the only way that they can work that out is that they have to know their own power. And out of their own power, they can collaborate to get the resources that they need. You see, the yin understands that they have to put up with the yang. Well, they do. They just understand that. Yeah, he's a man. What are you going to do? The yin knows that. Men don't say that. Only women say that because it's true. They know that they're putting up with the male because they have to, because they get certain advantages out of the male. They get certain advantages out of the yang. Now remember, I'm talking in archetypes here. Obviously, that works at many different levels when you get to the surface and you get all these mixes inside of us of a little bit of this and a little bit of that and everything else. But when you're looking at it purely this way, please understand that's what it's all about. And the power of the yin is touch. This is the great female power. This is truly their magic. It's their touch. And that touch carries everything that they need to find the collaboration, because it's only the yin that will do that. The yin-yin. It will reach out and it will touch. And you see, then it gets the yang to go all kind of squishy and whooshy. You know, and the yang says, can I build a temple for you? You know? And by the way, you know, before I build the temple, you know, do you have some place, you know, nice place where we can go off together? And the yin going, you know, man, what to do? Because, of course, that's the way it is, and it's the way that it's always been. And then we run around with all these psychological problems about that, you know. Men trying to be big shots, you know, only to discover that they're really kind of, you know. I mean, there's all this stuff going on. It's very funny. Because when you get right down to the source of it, if you don't bring morality to these things, it's so easy to dump on roles. It really is. But if you don't deal with the morality of that, you can see the beauty in each of them, the power in each of them, the specialness of each of them, because after all, we're part of all of that. It's what makes the world go round. But it's essential to see here what comes out of the yin with a beauty in that sense, because it is a life force. It is bringing real life, not the illusion of the light that says, tomorrow we go to the next valley, you know. And there's the yin saying, oh, I got to pack again. You know, it's just the way that it goes.